The handcuffs clicked shut around my brother's wrists with a sound that echoed through our family's pristine living room like a gunshot. Military Police Sergeant Davis stood behind him, his face granite hard as he read the charges that would shatter everything my parents believed about their perfect golden boy. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Marcus Allen Fitzgerald, you are under arrest for violation of the Stolen Valor Act, impersonating a federal officer, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft of government property. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. You have the right to remain silent. My mother, Patricia Fitzgerald, stood frozen in her cream-colored silk blouse, her manicured hand pressed against her throat as if she couldn't breathe. My father, Richard Fitzgerald, CEO of Fitzgerald Construction, had gone completely white, his coffee mug still suspended halfway to his lips. The morning news was still playing softly in the background, but the sound felt muffled, distant, as if we were all underwater. But I wasn't shocked. I wasn't surprised. Standing in the doorway of the home that had cast me out 3 years ago, I felt something entirely different. Vindication. The bitter, cold satisfaction of watching lies finally crumble under the weight of truth. This is impossible, my mother whispered, her voice cracking. Marcus is a decorated Navy SEAL. He saved lives in Afghanistan. He has the medals. He has the photograph. Sergeant Davis's expression didn't change. Ma'am, your son has never served a single day in the United States military. The medals he wears belong to Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, who died in Kandahar in 20. The photographs were stolen from classified military archives. The uniform he wore to collect over $200,000 in veteran benefits belongs to a soldier who gave his life for this country. Marcus said nothing. The golden boy who had commanded every room he entered, who had never met a lie he couldn't sell or a story he couldn't spin, stood there in absolute silence. His perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from wherever they had arrested him. For the first time in his 28 years, Marcus Fitzgerald had nothing to say. My father finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. There has to be some mistake. Marcus wouldn't. He couldn't. Fitzgerald, Sergeant Davis said, his tone professional but unforgiving. We have security footage of your son breaking into a military storage facility in Norfolk. We have financial records showing deposits into his accounts from 3 different veteran benefit programs. We have testimony from witnesses who watched him wear the uniform of a dead hero to collect money meant for actual veterans. The weight of those words settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. I watched my parents' faces as reality began to sink in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some bureaucratic error that Daddy's money and connections could fix. This was the complete and total exposure of everything Marcus had built his life on. And there's more, Sergeant Davis continued, pulling out a thick manila fold. Your son has been running an elaborate scheme for the past 5 years. He's collected veteran benefits in 7 different states. He's accepted donations from military support charities. He's spoken at veteran events, collecting speaking fees for service he never provided. The total amount we're looking at is close to $500,000 in fraudulent claims. My mother's legs gave out. She sank into her antique wingback chair, the same chair where she had sat 3 years ago when she told me I was no longer welcome in this house. The same chair where she had chosen Marcus over truth, lies over her own daughter. Furthermore, Sergeant Davis said, his eyes moving between my parents, we have reason to believe that other family members may have been aware of and complicit in this fraud. The investigation is ongoing. That's when my father's head snapped toward me. His eyes, usually so confident and commanding, were wild with panic and something else. Recognition. He knew why I was here. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. Samantha, he said, my name falling from his lips like an accusation. What did you do? 3 years. It had taken me 3 years to get to this moment. 3 years since they had thrown me out of this house for refusing to keep quiet about Marcus's lie. 3 years since they had chosen their golden boy over their daughter who had actually served, who had actually bled for her country, who had actually earned the right to wear the uniform. I didn't do anything, Dad, I said, my voice steady and calm. I just stopped protecting him. The truth was so much more complicated than that simple sentence. But watching Marcus being led away in handcuffs, seeing the empire of lies he had built finally collapsing, I felt a strange sense of peace. The war I had been fighting since I came home from my second deployment in Iraq was finally over. Marcus had been their pride and joy, their success story, their proof that the Fitzgerald family raised heroes. They had displayed his fake medals in the living room like trophies. They had brought him to charity events where he gave speeches about the horrors of war he had never experienced. They had watched him accept standing ovations for battles he had never fought. And when I had tried to tell them the truth, when I had presented them with evidence that their perfect son was a fraud, they had called me jealous, bitter, unstable. They said my deployments had changed me, made me paranoid and vindictive. They said I couldn't stand to see Marcus succeed where I had only found trauma. The day they kicked me out, my mother had looked me in the eye and said, "We will not let your mental health issues destroy your brother's reputation. If you can't support this family, then you're not part of." My father had been more direct. "Choose your words carefully, Samantha, because once you leave this house, there's no coming back." I had chosen the truth, and I had left with nothing but the clothes on my back, and the knowledge that someday, somehow, Marcus's lies would catch up with him. I just never imagined I would be the one to hand him over to the authorities who would bring him down. As the military police vehicle pulled away from the circular driveway, taking Marcus to a fate he had earned through years of deception, my parents stood at the window watching their carefully constructed world crumble. The son they had chosen over me, the hero they had celebrated and protected, was nothing more than a thief who had stolen the honor of better men. I pulled out my phone and looked at the business card I had been carrying for 6 months. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, Criminal Investigation Division, the woman who had listened when I finally decided to come forward, the woman who had taken my evidence seriously when my own family had dismissed it as lies. "It's done," I texted her. "He's in custody." Her response came back immediately. "Outstanding work, Fitzgerald. Justice has been served." Justice. It was a word I had stopped believing in 3 years ago when my parents chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. But standing in the driveway of the house that had rejected me, watching the aftermath of Marcus's arrest, I was beginning to understand that justice wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it required patience. Sometimes it required sacrifice. Sometimes it required walking away from everything you thought you wanted in order to protect something more important. As I turned to leave, my father appeared at the front door. His face was haggard, aged by the events of the morning in a way that years hadn't managed to accomplish. "Samantha, wait," he called out, his voice desperate. "We need to talk. We need to fix this." I stopped and looked back at him, this man who had been my hero once, before I learned that heroes could choose convenience over courage. "There's nothing to fix, Dad," I said. "This is exactly what you asked for 3 years ago. You chose Marcus. You chose his lies over my truth. You got exactly what you wanted. But we didn't know," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "We couldn't have known he was lying about everything." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any indication that he understood the magnitude of what had happened here today. But all I saw was panic, the desperate scrambling of a man trying to save himself from the consequences of his choices. "Yes, you did know," I said quietly. "I told you. I showed you the evidence. I begged you to listen. And you threw me out instead." The weight of that truth settled between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. 3 years ago, they had made their choice. Today they were finally living with the consequences. As I walked away from the Fitzgerald family estate for what I knew would be the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. The burden of protecting people who had never protected me was finally lifted from my shoulders. Behind me, I could hear my mother's sobs echoing from inside the house, the sound of a woman realizing that everything she had believed about her family was built on lies. But I didn't look back. I had spent too many years looking backward, trying to find a way to make them see the truth. Today, I was finally ready to look forward. The golden boy was gone. The truth had won. and for the first time since I had come home from war, I was ready to start building a life based on something solid, something real, something that couldn't be destroyed by the selfish choices of people who cared more about appearances than authenticity. The war was over, and I had finally won. Growing up in the Fitzgerald household meant understanding that success was measured in achievements displayed on walls and trophies arranged on mantels. Our father, Richard, had built Fitzgerald Construction from a small residential outfit into a multi-million-dollar empire that specialized in government contracts, military bases, federal buildings, infrastructure projects that connected our family name to service and patriotism in ways that felt both meaningful and profitable. The walls of our home told the story of a family obsessed with honor and legacy. Richard's framed certificates from the Chamber of Commerce hung beside photographs of him shaking hands with senators and generals. Patricia's charity work was documented in glossy magazine spreads, showcasing her fundraising galas for military families. Even as children, Marcus and I understood that we were not just siblings, we were future chapters in the Fitzgerald success story. Marcus was 18 months older than me, and from the earliest days I could remember, he possessed an almost magnetic charisma that drew people into his orbit. Teachers loved him, coaches fought to have him on their teams, and other kids naturally gravitated toward his easy confidence. He had inherited our father's sharp jawline and our mother's striking blue eyes, combined with a natural athleticism that made everything look effortless. I was different. Where Marcus commanded attention through charm, I earned respect through competence. While he was student body president and star quarterback, I was valedictorian and captain of the debate team. Marcus collected friends. I collected knowledge. He made people feel good about themselves. I made people think harder about the world around them. Our parents celebrated both of us, but in distinctly different ways. Marcus's achievements were public victories to be shared with the world. His football trophies were displayed in the front hallway where visitors would see them immediately. His homecoming king crown sat in a place of honor on the dining room buffet. When he scored the winning touchdown in the state championship, our father rented billboard space to congratulate him. My achievements were praised privately, acknowledged with quiet pride and gentle encouragement to keep working hard. When I won the state science fair with a project on sustainable building materials, a direct application to our father's business, the recognition came in the form of a special dinner at home and a savings bond for college. Meaningful but contained, the difference became clearer during our senior year of high school. Marcus had been accepted to State University on a football scholarship, despite grades that were average at best. I had earned a full academic scholarship to MIT, along with acceptance letters from Harvard, Princeton, and Stanford. The celebration for Marcus's athletic achievement was a party for 50 people in our backyard, complete with a catered dinner and a local news crew. My academic success was acknowledged with a congratulations card and a promise that we would do something special when things weren't so busy. But I didn't resent Marcus for the attention. He was my big brother, and despite our different personalities, we had always been genuinely close. He protected me from bullies in middle school and taught me how to throw a perfect spiral when I wanted to try out for the flag football team. I helped him with his homework and covered for him when he snuck out to go to parties. We were partners in the complex navigation of growing up in a family where expectations were high and failure was not an option. The first crack in our family's perfect facade appeared during Marcus's sophomore year at State. I was finishing my senior year of high school when the phone call came. Marcus had been arrested for drunk driving after a party near campus. The charges were serious. His blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit, and he had rear-ended another car at a traffic light, sending a college student to the hospital with a concussion. I watched our parents handle the crisis with the efficiency of a military operation. Our father made phone calls to lawyers, judges, and university administrators. Our mother reached out to her charity connections to find character witnesses who could speak to Marcus's good heart and momentary lapse in judgment. Within a week, the charges had been reduced to reckless driving, the injured student's medical bills had been quietly paid, and Marcus was back on the football team with a warning that one more incident would end his scholarship. At family dinner the night after the plea deal was finalized, Our father raised his wine glass in a toast. To second chances, he said, looking directly at Marcus. And to learn from our mistakes. Marcus nodded solemnly, playing the role of the chastened son who had learned his lesson. But later that night, when he thought no one was listening, I heard him on the phone with his roommate, laughing about how the old man's connections had saved him from any real consequences. There was no remorse in his voice, no recognition of how serious the situation had been, only relief that he had escaped without having to face the actual results of his choices. That conversation planted a seed of unease in my mind, but I pushed it aside. Marcus was young, I told myself. He would grow out of this careless attitude. College was a time for mistakes, and our family had the resources to help him learn from them without destroying his future. I was heading to MIT in the fall, excited about studying aerospace engineering and maybe even working for NASA someday. The world felt full of possibilities. My freshman year at MIT was everything I had hoped it would be. The academic rigor challenged me in ways that high school never had, and I was surrounded by brilliant minds who shared my passion for solving complex problems. I was designing aircraft components and studying propulsion systems, diving deep into the science that had fascinated me since childhood. Meanwhile, Marcus was thriving in his own way at State University. His social media feeds were filled with parties, football victories, and the kind of college experiences that looked like scenes from a movie. Our parents visited him regularly, attending games and meeting his coaches and professors. They spoke with pride about his leadership on the team and his growing maturity. But there were signs that all was not well. Marcus's grades remained barely above the minimum required to maintain his scholarship. He had been suspended from 2 games for conduct detrimental to the team, though the details were never made public. And there had been other incidents. A fight at a bar that resulted in no charges but several stitches, a noise complaint at his off-campus apartment that brought the police, allegations of cheating on an economics exam that were quietly resolved without formal action. Each time our parents intervened. Each time the consequences were minimized or eliminated entirely. Each time Marcus emerged unscathed and apparently unlearned from the experience. The pattern became clear during Marcus's junior year. When I was home for Thanksgiving break, I was in my second year at MIT, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working part-time in a research lab that was developing new materials for spacecraft heat shields. I was proud of the work I was doing, excited about the internship opportunities that were opening up, and grateful for the education our family's success had made possible. Marcus arrived home the day before Thanksgiving in a new BMW that our father had given him as an early graduation gift. He spent dinner regaling us with stories about his leadership role on the football team and his plans for after graduation. He was considering several job offers, he said, all arranged through our father's business connections. Professional football was still a possibility, though his stats suggested that was more dream than realistic option. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Marcus pulled me aside. "Sammy," he said, using the childhood nickname that always made me feel like his little sister rather than a college student with a 4.0 GPA. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to keep it between us." What he told me would haunt me for years to come. He had been kicked off the football team 6 weeks earlier for a failed drug test. The university had agreed to keep the dismissal quiet to avoid embarrassing the athletic department. But Marcus was no longer a student at State University. He had been living in his apartment, spending our parents' money, and pretending to attend classes while actually doing nothing but partying and sleeping off hangovers. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my heart sinking as I realized the magnitude of his deception. "Because I need help figuring out how to tell Mom and Dad," he said. "You're the smart one. You always know what to say." But I didn't know what to say. I was 19 years old, trying to navigate my own challenges at one of the most demanding universities in the world, and my brother was asking me to help him confess to a lie that would devastate our parents and destroy their image of their golden son. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom surrounded by the academic awards and science fair ribbons that documented my own achievements, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my relationship with my family. I decided to trust Marcus to handle his own problems. I decided to believe that he would find the courage to tell our parents the truth. I was wrong. Marcus never told them about being kicked out of school. Instead, he spent the next 6 months perfecting an elaborate fiction that would become the foundation for everything that followed. He created fake transcripts, forged correspondence from professors, and invented stories about his continued success on the football team. Our parents, desperate to believe in their son's redemption story, accepted every lie without question. The web of deception was just beginning to take shape, but none of us could see it yet. We were still the successful Fitzgerald family, raising 2 accomplished children who would carry on the family tradition of success and service. The cracks were spreading beneath the surface, but the facade remained intact. It would be another 2 years before Marcus's appetite for easy lies would lead him to the stolen valor that would eventually destroy everything. But the foundation for that catastrophe was being laid right there in our family dining room, where truth was less important than maintaining the appearance of success, and where love was measured by a willingness to protect lies rather than confront them. None of us knew we were standing on quicksand, watching our golden boy sink deeper with every deception we chose to ignore. We thought we were building a legacy. Instead, we were constructing the very framework that would eventually collapse and bury us all. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in November, exactly 1 week after I had returned from my second deployment in Iraq. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, still trying to readjust to the quietness of suburban life after months of constant vigilance in Fallujah, when I heard unfamiliar voices downstairs in the living room. My body tensed automatically. A reflex that had kept me alive overseas, but felt out of place in the safety of home. The voices were formal, respectful, but carried an undertone of reverence that I recognized immediately. Someone was talking about military service, about sacrifice and honor, in the specific way that civilians spoke when they were trying to show proper respect for veterans. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Marcus was speaking, his voice carrying that same confident tone he had used to charm teachers and coaches throughout high school. But the words coming out of his mouth froze my blood. The hardest part wasn't the firefights, he was saying. It was watching good men die, and knowing you couldn't save them all. My unit lost 3 guys in an IED explosion outside Kandahar. I still wake up some nights hearing their voices. The voices downstairs grew more animated. I heard my mother's laugh, bright and proud, followed by my father's booming voice talking about our family's tradition of service, and how both our children understand what it means to serve their country. Both our children. The words hit me like a physical blow. I crept down a few more stairs until I could see into the living room. Marcus was standing next to the fireplace, wearing a dress blue military uniform that I had never seen before. On his chest were ribbons and medals that made my stomach lurch with recognition, including what looked exactly like my Bronze Star with Valor. Our parents were sitting with what appeared to be representatives from the local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter, and a journalist from the town newspaper. Everyone was focused on Marcus, hanging on his every word as he described battles he had never fought, and comrades he had never served beside. "Where did you get that uniform?" I said, my voice cutting through the warm conversation like a blade. Everyone turned toward me. The VFW representative smiled politely, probably assuming I was a proud sister coming to share in the celebration. My parents looked pleased, as if my arrival would add to the perfect family tableau they were presenting. Marcus's expression flickered for just a moment, a flash of panic so quick that anyone who didn't know him well would have missed it. But I saw it. And in that instant, I knew that my brother had crossed a line from simple lying into something far more sinister. "Sammy," he said, recovering his composure with the practiced ease of someone who had been lying his entire life. "Come meet everyone. We were just talking about my time with the 82nd Airborne in Afghanistan." The 82nd Airborne. Afghanistan. I felt like I was falling through space. Marcus had never served in any branch of the military. He had never been to Afghanistan. He had never been anywhere more dangerous than a college party. "Marcus," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a minute? Actually, said the journalist, a young woman with eager eyes and a digital recorder, I'd love to interview both of you. It must be incredible to have siblings who both served with such distinction. Both served with such distinction. The room began to spin. I looked at my parents, expecting to see confusion, questions, some recognition that what was happening made no sense. Instead, I saw pride, beaming, uncomplicated pride in their son who was describing my war, my service, my sacrifice as if it belonged to him. I need some air, I managed to say, and fled to the back porch. I stood in the cold November night, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. My brother was wearing a military uniform he had never earned, displaying medals that belonged to me, telling stories that were stolen from my memory, and my parents were not only allowing it, they were celebrating it. Marcus found me 10 minutes later, still wearing that pristine uniform that had probably cost him more than most soldiers made in a month. Okay, I know how this looks, he said, holding up his hands in a gesture that was supposed to be placating. How does this look? I turned to face him, and I could feel years of suppressed resentment rising in my throat like bile. How this looks is like you're wearing my medals and claiming my service as your own. It's not that simple, he said, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used when he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. Look, I needed something to put on job applications. Dad's construction company is competing for more military contracts, and having a veteran in the family helps with the bidding process. It's just business, just business. He had reduced my service, my sacrifice, the deaths of my friends to a competitive advantage for our father's company. Those are my stories, I said, my voice rising. Sergeant Rodriguez died in my arms. I carried his body back to base. And you're in there telling strangers about it like it happened to you. But it's not like you were using them, Marcus said, his tone becoming defensive. You never talk about your time over there. You never want to go to the veteran events Mom sets up. These stories, these experiences, they're just sitting there wasted while you hide in your room dealing with your PTSD or whatever. PTSD or whatever. The casual dismissal of my trauma, combined with his theft of my service, created a rage so pure and white-hot that I could barely see. Get out of that uniform, I said. Sammy, be reasonable. This is bigger than just us. This is about the family business. About— Get out of that uniform, I screamed, my voice echoing across the backyard. The back door opened and our parents emerged, followed by the VFW representatives and the journalist. Everyone looked concerned, as if I were having some kind of breakdown that was disrupting an otherwise pleasant evening. What's going on out here? My father asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. I looked at Marcus, giving him one last chance to tell the truth. To admit what he was doing, to stop this charade before it went any further. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and looked our parents directly in the eye. Samantha is having some kind of episode, he said, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. I think her deployments affected her more than we realized. She's been saying some pretty strange things about my service record. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. He wasn't just stealing my valor, he was using my trauma against me, painting me as unstable to cover his lies. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Honey, my mother said, moving toward me with the careful movements of someone approaching a dangerous animal. Maybe you should go inside and rest. This has been a big adjustment. Coming home from deployment. He's never served, I said desperately. He's wearing my medals. Those are my stories. The journalist raised her eyebrows, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of her. The VFW representatives exchanged glances that suggested they had seen this kind of veteran family conflict before. Samantha, my father said, his voice firm but not unkind, you're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing this family. That's when I realized the full scope of what was happening. It wasn't just that Marcus was lying, It was that my parents wanted to believe his lies. They needed to believe them. Marcus's stolen valor gave them the perfect son they had always wanted. A war hero who could speak eloquently about his service, who could represent the family at public events, who could help win military contracts for the family business. I was the inconvenient reality. The actual veteran who came home damaged, who had nightmares, who didn't want to talk about her service in ways that were useful for their purposes. Marcus was the perfect fiction. The sanitized, marketable version of military service that looked good in newspaper articles and business proposals. "You have a choice," my father said quietly, pulling me aside while Marcus continued entertaining their guests with more stolen stories. "You can support your brother and this family, or you can keep making accusations that make you sound unstable and vindictive." I looked at him, this man who had been my hero for most of my life, and realized that he was asking me to become complicit in the theft of my own service. He was asking me to watch my brother profit from my sacrifice and remain silent about it. "What if I can't do that?" I asked. His expression hardened. "Then you need to decide what's more important to you, your family, or whatever point you think you're trying to make." That night, I went upstairs and opened my duffel bag. Inside were my actual medals, my actual citations, my actual proof of service. I compared them to what Marcus had been wearing downstairs. The ribbons were identical. The medals were identical. Even the arrangement was exactly the same as mine. He hadn't just stolen random military decorations. He had specifically, deliberately stolen my valor, my service, my sacrifice, my identity as a soldier. The next morning, I found the newspaper article online. There was Marcus, smiling confidently in his stolen uniform, with a headline that read, "Local Hero Returns from Afghanistan." The article described his fictional service with the 82nd Airborne, his imaginary Medal of Valor, and his made-up rescue of wounded soldiers. Everything that was true about my service had been transformed into lies about him. When I confronted my parents with the article, with the evidence of what Marcus had done, they listened politely and then delivered their verdict. "You're clearly struggling with some serious mental health issues," my mother said, "and we can't let your problems destroy your brother's future. If you can't be supportive of this family," my father added, "then maybe you need to find somewhere else to live until you get yourself sorted out." They were choosing Marcus's lies over my truth. They were choosing a comfortable fiction over an inconvenient reality. They were choosing their golden boy over their daughter who had actually served. That afternoon, I packed my belongings and left the house where I had grown up. As I drove away, I could see Marcus through the living room window, still wearing his stolen uniform, still living in the story he had stolen from me. I had lost my family, my home, and my identity all in the span of 24 hours, but I had kept my integrity. It would take me 3 years to understand that sometimes integrity is the only foundation strong enough to build a real life on. The studio apartment in downtown Phoenix cost $800 a month and smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. It was November in Arizona, which meant the oppressive summer heat had finally broken, but the thin walls did nothing to muffle the sounds of my neighbors' arguments, televisions, and late-night parties. After growing up in a house with 7 bedrooms and a 3-car garage, the transition to 400 square feet of peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights was jarring. But it was mine. For the first time since leaving for my first deployment, I had a space that belonged entirely to me, where no one could question my choices or demand that I participate in their elaborate fictions. The apartment came furnished with a sagging couch, a card table that served as both desk and dining room, and a Murphy bed that squeaked every time I rolled over. It wasn't much, but it was honest. I had chosen Phoenix deliberately. It was far enough from home that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from my old life, but close enough to several military bases that there would be a community of veterans who might understand what I was going through. More importantly, Arizona had a strong job market for people with my technical background and security clearance. The first month was the hardest. I had saved enough money from my military pay to cover rent and basic expenses for a while, but the isolation was crushing. I would wake up each morning in the unfamiliar apartment, surrounded by the sounds of a city I didn't know, with no family to call and no clear purpose beyond simple survival. The nightmares got worse. Without the familiar routines of family dinners and childhood bedrooms to anchor me, my mind began replaying the worst moments of my deployments with vivid intensity. The worst part wasn't the dreams themselves. It was waking up alone with them. In my parents' house, even during the brief time I had been home, there had been other people nearby. The knowledge that my family was sleeping down the hall had provided a thin comfort during the darkest hours. I started taking long walks through the desert at sunrise, partly because the physical activity helped manage my anxiety, and partly because the vast emptiness of the landscape felt honest in a way that nothing else did. The desert didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. "You're new," she said as I walked past, not as a question but as a simple observation. "You walk like someone who's used to watching for threats," she said, "but you're not familiar with this particular terrain yet." "Combat veteran?" She nodded as if this explained something important. "I did 3 tours in Afghanistan before an IED took my leg and most of my hearing in my left ear. Been a civilian for 8 years now, and I still can't sleep through a full night." She patted the bench beside her, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I sat down. Elena had the kind of presence that made conversation feel natural rather than forced. She didn't ask about my service or my family, or why I was living alone in a studio apartment. Instead, she talked about the desert, about the way the light changed throughout the day, about the hidden strength required to survive in a place that offered no easy comfort. Elena introduced me to other veterans who were navigating similar challenges. There was Miguel, a Marine who had lost both legs in Fallujah and was now studying to become a physical therapist. Sarah, a Navy medic who had started a small business building custom motorcycles for disabled veterans. David, an Air Force pilot who had developed severe PTSD after a mission went wrong and was now working as a wilderness therapy guide. They didn't ask me to explain my story, and I didn't ask them to explain theirs. We understood that some experiences were too complex to summarize in casual conversation. What mattered was that we were all engaged in the same fundamental project: figuring out how to build meaningful lives from the pieces that remained after everything familiar had been stripped away. Elena offered me a part-time job with her nonprofit, helping other veterans navigate the bureaucracy of disability claims and benefit applications. The work paid barely above minimum wage, but it gave me a purpose beyond my own survival. I spent my days helping former soldiers fill out forms, attend appointments, and advocate for themselves with various government agencies. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my brother was collecting benefits for service he had never provided, I was helping actual veterans fight for assistance they had legitimately earned. Some days, the contradiction made me so angry I could barely function. Other days, it reminded me why fighting for truth mattered, even when the fight seemed hopeless. My evenings were spent taking classes at Phoenix Community College. I had enrolled in a computer science program, partly because the technical challenges appealed to me, and partly because I needed skills that could lead to better employment opportunities. The GI Bill covered my tuition, and the structure of assignments and deadlines provided a framework for organizing my days. But the real transformation began when I started volunteering at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center on weekends. The hospital was understaffed and overwhelmed, and they desperately needed volunteers who could relate to the patients' experiences. I found myself spending hours with veterans who were struggling with injuries, addiction, depression, and the complex challenge of reintegrating into civilian life. There was Robert, a Vietnam veteran, who had been homeless for 20 years before finally accepting help. He taught me about the long-term effects of untreated trauma and the importance of community in healing. There was Jennifer, an Iraq veteran who had lost her right arm to an IED and was learning to navigate the world with a prosthetic. She showed me that adaptation was possible, but it required accepting that normal was something you had to define for yourself. Most importantly, there was James Chen, whose younger brother Danny had been one of the 3 soldiers killed in the IED explosion that I still had nightmares about. James was receiving treatment for his own combat injuries when he learned that I had served in the same unit as his brother. "Danny talked about you in his letters home," James told me during one of our conversations in the hospital cafeteria. "He said you were the kind of soldier who never left anyone behind." Those words hit me harder than any medal or commendation ever had. Danny Chen had been 19 years old when he died, barely out of basic training, with a smile that could light up a room and a habit of sharing care packages from home with anyone who needed them. The fact that he had remembered me in his letters to his family felt like a gift I hadn't earned. James and I began meeting regularly outside the hospital. He was dealing with his own survivor's guilt, his own struggles with a family that didn't understand what he had experienced overseas. But unlike my family, James's parents honored his service and supported his healing process. They had turned their grief over Danny's death into advocacy for better veteran care. "You know what pisses me off most about stolen valor cases?" James said one afternoon as we sat in a coffee shop near the hospital. "It's not just that they're stealing honor they didn't earn, it's that they're making it harder for real veterans to be believed when we ask for help." His words crystallized something that had been bothering me for months. Marcus's lies weren't just about personal glory or family pride. They were part of a larger pattern that undermined the credibility of actual veterans. Every fake hero made it harder for real veterans to access services, to be taken seriously, to have their experiences acknowledged. I started researching stolen valor cases in my spare time, learning about the legal framework that made such fraud prosecutable, and the investigative techniques used to expose false claims. I wasn't planning anything specific. I was just trying to understand the scope of the problem and the mechanisms available for addressing it. The more I learned, the more I realized that Marcus's deception was far from unique. There were thousands of people across the country claiming military service they had never provided, wearing uniforms they had never earned, collecting benefits meant for actual veterans. Some were small-time fraudsters looking for free drinks at bars. Others were running elaborate schemes that bilked taxpayers out of millions of dollars. By my second year in Phoenix, I had completed my associate degree in computer science and landed a better job with a defense contractor that worked on cybersecurity projects for military installations. The work paid well enough for me to move to a larger apartment, and the security clearance required for the position gave me access to databases and information systems that most civilians never saw. I was building a new life, step by step, choice by choice. I had friends who respected my boundaries, work that challenged my intellect, and a sense of purpose that came from helping other veterans navigate their own challenges. I wasn't the same person who had grown up in the Fitzgerald mansion, but I was someone I could respect. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were less frequent and less intense. I had learned techniques for managing my anxiety, and I had a support network of people who understood what I was going through. Most importantly, I had stopped waiting for my family to acknowledge the truth about Marcus's deception. I was no longer fighting for their approval or validation. I was fighting for something bigger, the principle that truth mattered, that service meant something, that the sacrifice of real veterans deserved protection from those who would exploit it for personal gain. It took 2.5 years in the wilderness of Phoenix for me to understand that healing wasn't about returning to who I had been before. It was about becoming someone strong enough to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. When I finally decided to contact the authorities about Marcus's stolen valor, it wasn't because I wanted revenge against my family. It was because I had learned that some truths are too important to remain buried, and some lies are too dangerous to allow to continue. The girl who had been cast out of her family's mansion was gone. In her place was a woman who had been forged in the desert heat, tempered by genuine struggle, and strengthened by the knowledge that her worth didn't depend on other people's approval. I was ready for war. And this time I was fighting for all the right reasons. 6 months after Marcus's arrest, I found myself standing in the very cemetery where Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez had been laid to rest 4 years earlier. The headstone was simple granite, engraved with his name, dates of service, and the words beloved son, brother, hero. Fresh flowers, marigolds, his mother's favorite, had been placed there recently, along with a small American flag that fluttered in the desert breeze. I knelt beside the grave and placed my own offering, a folded copy of the newspaper article announcing Marcus's conviction and sentencing, 25 years in federal prison for stolen valor, fraud, and conspiracy. It wasn't enough to bring Miguel back, but it was justice for the memory he had stolen. "I'm sorry it took so long," I whispered to the stone. "But we got him." The legal proceedings had taken months to unfold completely. Marcus's stolen valor case had led investigators to uncover an entire network of fraudulent activity. He hadn't just stolen my medals and stories. He had been part of a larger operation that sold fake military documents, arranged for false veteran benefits, and even provided fraudulent military records for people seeking government security clearances. The investigation revealed that Marcus had connected with this network during his final semester at State University, when he was desperately looking for ways to reinvent himself after being kicked off the football team. What had started as a simple lie to impress potential employers had evolved into a full-scale criminal enterprise that defrauded the government of nearly $2 million. My father's construction company had been awarded 17 military contracts over the past 3 years, with Marcus's fake veteran status serving as a key factor in the bidding process. Every one of those contracts was now under federal review, and Fitzgerald Construction was facing civil penalties that would likely bankrupt the company entirely. The ripple effects had been swift and devastating. My parents had lost their house, their social standing, and most of their friends. The carefully constructed image of the perfect patriotic family had crumbled under the weight of federal indictments and media scrutiny. The Fitzgerald name, which had once opened doors throughout our community, was now synonymous with fraud and betrayal. But the most profound transformation hadn't happened to them. It happened to me. I was living in Denver now, in a small house near the mountains that I had bought with my savings from 3 years of careful financial planning. The job with the defense contractor had led to better opportunities, and I was now working as a cybersecurity specialist for a firm that helped protect veteran benefit systems from exactly the kind of fraud that Marcus had perpetrated. My work had meaning beyond a paycheck. Every security protocol I designed, every vulnerability identified, every fraudulent claim I helped investigators track down was a small victory for the veterans who deserved those benefits. I was using the skills I had developed during my exile to protect the integrity of the system that served people like Miguel Rodriguez, like James Chen, like Elena, and all the other veterans I had come to know and respect. The house was modest, but comfortable, with large windows that looked out on the Front Range, and a small garden where I grew vegetables and herbs. I had learned to cook properly during my years in Phoenix, partly out of necessity and partly because there was something therapeutic about creating something nourishing from simple ingredients. Elena had visited twice since I moved to Denver, and both times she had commented on how different I seemed. "You're not angry anymore," she observed during her most recent visit, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "You're peaceful. That's not easy to achieve." She was right. The rage that had sustained me through 3 years of exile, through the investigation, through the trial, had finally burned itself out. In its place was something quieter but more durable, a sense of purpose that didn't depend on fighting against something, but rather on building towards something better. I had started volunteering with a new organization called Veterans Truth Initiative, which worked to identify and prosecute stolen valor cases across the country. The work was methodical and often frustrating, requiring patience and attention to detail that reminded me of my military training. But every fraudulent claim we exposed meant that resources could go to veterans who had actually earned them. James Chen had joined the organization as well. Moving to Denver after completing his own degree in social work, we had become close friends during the investigation into Marcus, bonded by our shared understanding of loss and our commitment to protecting the memory of the soldiers who hadn't made it home. James brought a different perspective to the work, where I focused on the technical and legal aspects of fraud detection. He specialized in counseling veterans who had been victimized by benefit fraud. The thing about healing," James told me one afternoon as we worked together on a particularly complex case, "is that it's not about forgetting what happened to you. It's about transforming the pain into something useful." He was describing his own journey as much as mine. Losing his brother had nearly destroyed him, but channeling that grief into advocacy for veteran rights had given him a way to honor Danny's memory while building something meaningful from the wreckage of loss. I thought about transformation often as I settled into my new life. Samantha, who had grown up in the Fitzgerald mansion, desperate for her parents' approval and willing to stay silent about Marcus's lies, felt like a different person entirely. That girl had believed that family loyalty meant protecting people you loved from the consequences of their choices, even when those choices caused harm to others. The woman I had become understood that real loyalty meant holding people accountable to their best selves, not enabling them to become their worst. Love without truth wasn't love at all. It was just elaborate self-deception that ultimately served no one. My relationship with my parents had evolved in ways I never could have predicted. They had both written to me during Marcus's trial, letters that were equal parts apology and plea for forgiveness. My mother's letter was particularly difficult to read, filled with regret for choosing Marcus's lies over my truth, and grief for the years of relationship we had lost to their stubborn refusal to see what was right in front of them. I had written back, eventually, not to offer forgiveness, that was still a work in progress, but to establish boundaries for any future relationship we might have. They would need to acknowledge not just that they had been wrong about Marcus, but that they had actively participated in perpetuating his fraud. They would need to understand that trust, once broken so completely, could only be rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through words or grand gestures. My father had responded with characteristic directness, accepting responsibility for his choices and asking what he could do to begin making amends. My mother's response had been more complex, filled with justifications and explanations that suggested she still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what had happened. I was prepared for the possibility that we might never have a real relationship again. The girl who had once desperately wanted their approval was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to value her own integrity more than other people's comfort. If they could meet me in that space of honesty and accountability, we might eventually rebuild something authentic. If not, I had already proven to myself that I could build a meaningful life without their validation. The most unexpected gift of my transformation had been discovering what real family actually looked like. Elena, James, and the community of veterans I had connected with in Phoenix and Denver had shown me that belonging wasn't about shared blood or childhood history. It was about shared values, mutual respect, and the willingness to show up for each other during difficult times. When I had nightmares, now, which still happened occasionally, I had people to call who understood. When I achieved professional milestones or personal victories, I had people who celebrated with genuine joy rather than competitive assessment. When I needed advice or support or simply someone to listen, I had built a network of relationships based on authenticity rather than obligation. On the anniversary of Miguel Rodriguez's death, I organized a small memorial service in Denver for local veterans who had been killed in action. We read their names, shared their stories, and committed ourselves to protecting the honor they had earned through their sacrifice. It was a simple ceremony, attended by fewer than 30 people, but it felt more meaningful than any of the elaborate public events my family had organized to celebrate Marcus's fake heroism. As the sun set behind the mountains and the small group of veterans began to disperse, James walked up beside me. "Miguel would have liked this," he said quietly. "Danny, too. They would have appreciated knowing that people remembered them honestly." Standing there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by people who had chosen to honor truth rather than convenient fiction, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my first deployment: complete peace. Not the absence of challenge or struggle, but the deep satisfaction of knowing that my life was aligned with my values, that my work mattered, and that the person I had become was someone I could respect. The girl who had been kicked out for telling the truth about her golden brother was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that the truth, however difficult, was always worth defending. That integrity was more valuable than comfort. That real strength came not from avoiding pain but from transforming it into purpose. The war was over, not just the war against Marcus's lies, but the war against the parts of myself that had once been willing to accept less than I deserved. I had built a new life from the ground up, and it was finally, completely, authentically mine. As I drove home through the mountain streets of Denver, the lights of the city spreading out below me like stars, I thought about the choices that had brought me to this moment. Every painful step, the exile, the struggle, the long process of building a new identity, had been necessary to become the person I was now. I wouldn't change any of it. The girl who had grown up in luxury but lived with lies had never been truly happy. The woman who lived modestly but honestly had found something far more valuable than comfort. She had found herself. And that was worth everything. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.